Good morning. It is truly my pleasure and my privilege to be here this morning and to serve as your area conference minister. In serving in that position, I resource clergy and churches in the Grand West Association, which is where Park finds its connection to other congregations. And I bring you greetings from the association and also from the conference. We at the conference are suffering a bit this week the departure of the Reverend Dr. Campbell Lovett, who retired, held our last staff meeting on Tuesday, and got in the moving van. He is safely on the East Coast. I'm not exactly sure where this morning, but we are a strong staff, and we work well as a team on your behalf and on behalf of all of the congregations and clergy and worshipers in the Michigan Conference. We are indeed grateful to congregations like this one who have made generous contributions to OCWM. I noticed a bulletin board somewhere as I was walking behind Ruth McCarty this morning. Our church's wider mission receives monies from congregations around our denomination and then redistributes them to the conferences where they support positions like mine, so that there are people in place to be a resource to congregations and clergy around the denomination. Additionally, we pay our dues we might call them dues, to the association, and those monies support our twice yearly programs in the spring and in the fall. They support scholarship funds for our members in discernment, and they also provide a subsidy for this really extensive psychological testing that every candidate for ministry undergoes in the United Church of Christ. And for that, we are truly grateful for your support. I found my way to the United Church of Christ as an adult, but I share historic family connections to each of the two groups that came together in 1957 to create this denomination. The Congregational Christian churches in my father's history on the one hand, and the German evangelical and Reformed folks who were indeed my grandparents and who voted to become part of the United Church of Christ in their small Detroit church. Bringing those two streams together in me, I feel as though I am home in the United Church of Christ. And as such, I look forward to being a resource for you as you begin the search for your new senior pastor, and also in any other way that you might feel I can be helpful. Will you pray with me, please? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. My late father-in-law was a brilliant legal scholar. You can Google the political history of the family I married into if you want to, but we won't talk about that here today. But John, as I knew him, was a father and a grandfather, and he was a lover of the turn of a good phrase. When he turned 75, the family compiled a booklet of his so-called famous sayings. Blessed be nothing, he would say. Blessed be nothing. He might have loved a phrase, but he didn't ever consider himself to be a theologian, I'm quite sure. But I think in that little phrase, he might have been. Blessed be nothing. Today's gospel reading takes us to the mountain and into the crowd that has gathered to hear Jesus' first sermon as related by Matthew. I love this gospel. It's year A, and so we get to be in Matthew all year long. I might not get to because I'm not preaching every week, but you all get to be. I chose a passage from this very Sermon on the Mount for my ordination sermon. Matthew's Jesus is the teacher. His disciples are learners. Together, they were focused on life in God's kingdom, what the call to this life means and meant to them, and how to share it with others. Just as our society is structured to acknowledge those who succeed, and that measures our success by our 401k accounts and the size of our houses, even the color of our skin. Ancient peoples were segregated too into groups that held privilege and those who did not. The disciples were decidedly called from the population that lived sparingly, worked hard, and expected little by way of regard or respect. The early disciples might have recognized themselves in this list as being poor in spirit, mournful and meek, hungry for righteousness and probably food too, merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers, and persecuted. But as Jesus continues to teach, they may have begun to recognize that they are the ones who have indeed already received blessings, a place in God's kingdom, a name as a child of God, an inheritance, hearts filled with righteousness and mercy. But they might have murmured, "Blessed be nothing." The word blessing or blessed is used today sometimes as a sign-off on emails, and I am guilty of that. Some of you know, you've received email from me that say, "Blessings on this day." I mean it, but we use it perhaps frivolously, a word with such power. What is blessed or blessed anyway? And in preparing for this sermon, I began to think of this word differently. Now, I didn't check in with my theologian friends, so I might be a little bit off, but I think my thinking is sound. What if we read these Beatitudes, these statements of blessing, as a declaration of acknowledgement, as a declaration of visibility or regard? What if in blessing the so-called nothing or small things, what if in their blessing they become valued and important? I wonder if we could read the Beatitudes something like this. God sees the ones who are poor in spirit. God sees those who mourn. Some of us here today want to be seen by God. God sees when we are part of the ones who are struggling and in tears, the ones who feel poor in spirit, and God comes to us wherever we are. Being disciples, even in ancient times, but especially today, means more than knowing what the gospel says. It means also living as though our place in this world is based on God's world, on God's calling to us. And it also means being an example of that by sharing the blessedness we have received. God's realm runs as undercurrent sometimes to the systems of power and authority that grant us blessing and grants blessing to others who achieve, to the ones who are born to wealth, to the ones who call themselves blessed. But such an invisible, intangible citizenship in God's realm might be seen as nothing. What if we read these blessings as acclamation of what God's realm is and who is invited and included there, as a declaration of who it is that God sees? What if such a blessing truly gives value to the people and relationships that our society ignores or simply doesn't see. And we heard in the words of the prayer this morning some of those that we pay attention to. Nadia Bolz-Weber, who is an edgy, contemporary Lutheran pastor, some of you might know about her, offers some explanation about who exactly God sees in our world today. Her modern Beatitudes call us to be learners, to be disciples, to claim our spot as citizens in God's realm, to be the ones who bring about this realm by demonstrating it. She calls us to imagine Jesus standing in front of us as teacher, Matthew's teacher. And when I imagine that, I hear Jesus declaring that God sees the poor in spirit. And Bolz-Weber elaborates, the agnostics, the ones who doubt, the ones who have nothing to offer. God sees those who mourn, those, in her words, for whom death is not an abstraction, those who have buried loved ones. God sees the ones that no one else notices, the kids who sit alone at middle school lunch tables. Her list in this category is long. God sees the meek, she says, the forgotten, the closeted, the unemployed, the unimpressive, and the underrepresented. God sees the ones who hunger for righteousness, the wrongly accused, the ones without documentation, without lobbyists to bring their issues to the important ones, kids in foster care. God sees the merciful, the people who make terrible business decisions for the sake of people. Burned out social workers, overworked teachers. And she says this, everyone who has ever forgiven me when I didn't deserve it. I wonder if we, the ones who want to identify with those who God sees, we who many of us are privileged in many of the comforts of life, we who proclaim Christ, I wonder if these Beatitudes are reminding us to see the ones that God sees, to align ourselves with all humanity, living life in this world, of course, and yet yearning for God's realm of justice and mercy and grace. Can we do it? Can we live as though we are affirming all that God sees? I think this is one of the most deeply held beliefs of our United Church of Christ. That Jesus later, before his death in the Gospel of John, is related as praying that his followers become one with each other as he is one with God, indivisible, inseparable from the very ones that God sees, whom we may overlook. I think our denomination and its historical positions of seeking out the least of these, of welcoming the ones from the margins, sets the message of God's realm not as an undercurrent, but above the cultural patterns of privilege and practice. Our historic roots are with the ones who first ordained a woman, and I say thanks be to God for that. The congregations in New Haven, Connecticut, who boarded the Amistad. The denomination that aligned with abolitionists, ordained people of color, marched with those seeking civil rights in the 1950s and 60s, and ordained a gay man over 50 years ago. We, UCC folks, we seek to live in God's realm, even in this world, despite our citizenship there. Blessed be nothing. God sees and God values the things we may feel are nothing. On Friday afternoon, I went to see Just Mercy. I have a friend who's become my movie buddy, and I'm so glad for that because I've actually seen quite a few recently. We went to see Just Mercy. This is the story of the establishment of the Equal Justice Initiative. This is the story of the life work of attorney Brian Stevenson to address inequity in the criminal justice system, beginning by advocating for death row inmate Johnny D, unjustly arrested, tried, convicted, and imprisoned. One of Stevenson's last line in the film goes something like this. If you've seen the movie, maybe you remember it. Stevenson says, "I believe it is necessary that we all need mercy. We all need justice, and perhaps we all need some measure of unmerited grace." Unmerited grace. Blessed by that, intangible, invisible, nothing. Today, we are preparing to feast at the table of Jesus Christ. We are invited there to taste unmerited grace. We are blessed, seen by God as we join folks like us. Maybe today we feel that blessedness. Maybe today we feel like we need it. And we join others who are very different from us. Maybe we feel we're the only one who needs that blessing today in a room full of people already blessed. But together we come to receive a taste of bread and cup that feeds us with holy food. This food sustains us to see as God sees, to love as God loves, and this food, this meal, sends us to live into God's realm among a world that works hard to turn away. May it be so.